So hi, everybody. I am Andrea. I'm from Gravity Fiber. I have a presentation for you, so I'm just going to share my screen here. There we go. I am in Midwestern Ontario. I always thought of Ontario as a shape of a whale. And so I'm right down on the bottom part of the tail there, near Toronto, right where that green star is. I'm about an hour from any city, 2 hours from Toronto. It's a small town called Harriston, Ontario. And I've lived everywhere, but this is where I am now. So that's where I'm coming to you from. I have a background in advertising. I was a graphic designer for many years. I have been a lifetime crocheter. I think I learned when I was about 7, and my mom taught me. And then many, many years later, she taught me how to knit. So I've been knitting for about 9 years. I also work at an alpaca farm in Harriston, Ontario, and I teach crochet at my local yarn store, as well as a new technique that I'm going to be demonstrating today called double row knitting. So stay tuned for that demonstration. So my mission is to brighten the world with vibrant color. You'll notice that a lot of my colorways are very vibrant and bright. Learn along the way and pay it forward. That's very important to me. That's why I teach people how to crochet. I think that fiber crafts need to be passed down through the generations. Encourage creativity, which is very important to me because I've had so many people say, oh, I can't knit, I'm not creative. And I don't believe the two are hand in hand. I think even if you don't knit or crochet or participate in any kind of fiber craft, you're still creative. You could be making an awesome breakfast monster for your 4-year-old or, amazing spreadsheets in Excel, and you're still creating something from nothing, which is something intrinsically special. I try to use heavy metal-free dyes as much as possible. There are times when I can't get the right color and I need to revert to commercial acid dyes, but this is something that is important to me. They're more environmentally friendly. And source Canadian fiber and breed specific wool. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So I primarily mix my colors from 6 heavy metal free acid dyes. Like I said, when I can't get the color that I'm looking for, I do rely on normal commercial dyes. It's funny because with my advertising background, I used to look at the world through print eyes, where I would be comparing things to cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And now I look at something and I think, that kind of looks like amethyst purple with fire red. So I've changed the way that I look at the world. It takes some trial and error, but the advertising background definitely helps. And like I said, my colorways are very vibrant. I use pans, pots, mason jars to get the results that I'm looking for. My shop is primarily dye to order. I strive for 1 week or less. And if it's going to be more than that, I do communicate that so that you're not wondering where your order is. So my yarn bases, I do a lot of testing when it comes to a new yarn base. I look at, what does the yarn look like after it's dyed? How much does it bloom? How does it take the color? These things are really important to me because I want you, the customer, to be happy with the end result. Right now I'm testing a sport weight base, which is an 80% superwash merino, 20% nylon. It's nice and squishy. And I'm also testing an organic merino sock base. It's certified organic under the Global Organic Textile Standard. And that means that it has gone through the superwash process with no chlorine. So it's a little bit better for the environment. And in some cases that also has to do with how the sheep are treated, no museling and that sort of thing. And that's an 80% Superwash Merino 20% nylon. So I'm in the process of testing that base. So my first base actually is Discovery Sock. And Discovery is 8 plies. It's an 80% Superwash Merino, 20% nylon. And those 8 plies really make this round and bouncy yarn. It's a beautiful workhorse yarn for socks or anything that you can think of to make out of sock yarn. It's really, it has beautiful drape because of those plies. Lots of air has been incorporated into that spin. So for Discovery Socks colorways, I've got Surf's Up on the left, which is a midnight blue combined with a spruce. There are some white bits that I've speckled, sort of think at the beach sand, and you know, that first bit of water that's aqua color going into the ocean. Berry Blast is on the right hand side. So that's pinky red and purples. And a lot of the sock bases I call random color pooling. You won't find that they stripe or pool in strange places because there's just little bits of color. There's enough on the strand to make maybe 3 or 4 stitches, and then you move on to the next color. We've also got Inkling, which is on the left there. And I've created, there's a story behind Inkling that I'll get to when I talk about the DK, but I've also created 25-gram minis to go with Inkling that complement them. They also match nicely with the other colorways. They're not exclusively for Inkling or anything. And then on the right-hand side, we have Swimming with Sharks, which is a nice blue mixed with gray and some white bits. Sea Glass, one of my all-time favorites, is on the left. It's a combination of 2 other colorways that I'll show you when we get to the DK, Marinus, which is blue, and Duck, which is green. And I just love the way the color plays off each other. Stormy Skies is on the right-hand side. And Stormy Skies is a beautiful slate blue with some amethyst purple highlights. So think there's a storm coming, it's dark, and you see a bolt of lightning. You get that purple glow, that sort of inspiration for that colorway. New for this year, I have an ombre skein called Dusk that runs from light blue to a darker blue. Now the double row knitting technique that I mentioned, that's what I use to make that shawl on the right. And I'm going to be showing you again how to do that. I also made a shawl for a friend out of that colorway that I can show you afterwards as well. And then we move into the MCN. So this is not your usual MCN. This is Ultra Luxe, 70% Superwash Merino and 20% cashmere, 10% nylon. So that 10% or 20% cashmere gives you an amazing halo, makes it a little bit hard to tink. So think about like 100% cashmere, how it gloms onto itself. But it is very soft. And colorway wise, we've got Arctic Flow, which is a brand new colorway for this year. Berry Blast, Surf's Up, Galaxy, and Sea Glass. So I tried to do a lot of crossover dyeing between bases so that you have different options to choose from. And also I find that the cashmere really affects how the dye is taken up. It's a little bit slower, a little bit more muted. And yeah, so we're going to talk about 100% natural wool as well. We're going to go down the rabbit hole today. Next base, I've got Ba for Lustrous Fingering, and this is really lofty. It's 100% untreated blue-faced Leicester, but don't let that word untreated fool you because it is soft. It has no itch. It's all luster. I don't know if you can pick up the way the lights have reflected against the yarn, but it's really nice. It's 24 to 28 microns. So microns, something that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. It's a way of measuring the fineness or coarseness of wool or other fibers. And so that's part of the rabbit hole that we're going to go down in a few minutes. So colorways for the Bas for Lustrous, we have Diablo on the left-hand side, which is an orangey red with dark red and black highlights. Fresh Lilacs, which is 3 kinds of purple. And one of the purple breaks into pink, and there's little white bits in there too. So sort of covers the spectrum of lilacs. We've got Marinus on the left. Marinus is an interesting color. It is blue, sort of green, sort of. It's not a teal. It's not a turquoise. It's like a nice in-between color. Think of the depths of the ocean underneath all that blue. And that's where you'll find Marinus. And it's actually part of Sea Glass, which is the colorway on the right-hand side. So Sea Glass gets twisted and as a skein put into the Marinus. And then once that exhausts, I take it out, twist it the other way, and put it into a green dye that I have a colorway called Duck. And so you're left with some white bits, you're left with green bits and the Marinus, as well as where the color has crossed over, and no 2 skeins are alike. It's really unique. Spring Growth is on your left-hand side. It's a combination of greens with a yellow highlight. And then new for this year, I've got Arctic Flow, which is inspired by all of those cold temperature maps that we've been seeing. I looked at that one day on the Weather Network and I thought that would make a really nice colorway. So I took some purple and light turquoise and blue, and that's how that skein went. That was the inspiration for that one. So the DK base, it's one of my favorites. It has a tight twist, which makes it springy, and a slight halo, which makes it soft. And it takes the dye beautifully. It knits up really nice. It's very bouncy yarn. It's 100% superwash merino. Sweaters, shawls. You could even make DK socks with it if you wanted to. I know there's no nylon in it, but it is pretty hardy yarn. So color-wise, for Serendipity, we have Diablo, which is a red with a black highlight. And there's a knit swatch on the right-hand side there. You can see the nice little dark bits. There's a Driftwood, which is a warm neutral. This one's been extremely popular. Duck, which is the green that's used in Sea Glass. I'm not sure I would, I mean, it's in the green family, but I wouldn't categorize it as green. It's actually teal, which was named after that duck. And that's where they got that color from. So it was a nice complement in Sea Glass. Marinus is that nice blue that is used in Sea Glass, which is, again, my favorite. I just love how it's different on every base. The Bas for Lustrous fingering takes it a little bit more muted, as does the MC squared, because it has that cashmere content. And then the 100% merino just is bright and a vibrant colorway. Fresh Lilacs is the 3 different purples with that little bit of pink there. Again, a totally random colorway. And Nui is also one of my favorites. It starts with black, then goes to purple, and is overdyed with black again. So there's a lot of depth in color in this colorway. Inkling is the one I mentioned for Discovery Sock. So Inkling is part of Be a Freaking Unicorn. And that was a collective of indie dyers and makers who created products to raise money for community-based LGBTQ+ organizations. I chose an organization in Waterloo Region, which is Okay to Be Me. And $5 of every skein went to that organization. We raised over $600. So it was really successful. Everybody loved the colorway, and I hope they do it again this year, because it was a lot of fun, and it was nice to see a collective without competition between dyers and makers. And then new for this year is Fieldstone on Serendipity and pumpkin spice. So Fieldstone is brown, black, gray, and a pinky quartz together. And pumpkin spice is a nice cinnamon color with some speckles. And I called this base serendipity because serendipity is described as the intersection of curiosity, perseverance, wisdom, and luck. And I thought that sounds a lot like fiber crafting to me. So I typically choose a lot of science-based, like space-based names, like Discovery was named after the space shuttle. But an MC squared, obviously, that serendipity seemed to fit. So we're going to talk a little bit about natural wool versus superwash. I'd always heard that natural wool had scales, and I didn't really understand what that meant until I saw this photo taken under the microscope. So each strand of wool has overlapping scales. And when there's a temperature shift from hot to cold, or there's agitation, those scales catch on each other and lock permanently. And that's what felting is. Superwash, there's a couple different processes, but they either remove the scales completely or they coat the scales so it's no longer an issue. When you have the scales on 100% wool, it causes the dye to be taken up a lot slower. There's more spread. Color is not as vibrant. Speckles are pretty much non-existent because it takes too long for that dye to absorb into the fiber. Whereas superwash, you get saturated, vibrant color. Because the scales are removed, though, you have more drape and less structure. So a sample or a swatch of natural wool will sit more or less flat, while the superwash will drape down. All right, so just a couple examples of natural wool versus superwash in terms of color. So we've got Fieldstone and pumpkin spice here. On the left-hand side, we have natural wool. It's actually one of my knit Canadian bases, which we're going to get to next. And you can see there's splotches of color, but they're very kind of muted. They spread a lot more. Whereas on the right-hand side is the superwash. You can see there's speckles, there's splops of color. Pretty much the dye has stayed where I've put it. And the same thing on the right-hand side with the pumpkin spice. You see darker patches of color, but you don't get that clear defined speckle like you do on the pumpkin spice. Okay, so knit Canadian is very important to me. It's 100% Canadian grown, spun and dyed wool. And it started when I started listening to a UK podcast from a woman named Louise Scully. She does a podcast called Wool Work. And she started a movement in the UK called Knit British to encourage crafters to use British wool. They have the Falkland Islands there, and they have all kinds of sheep farms. And we have tons of sheep here. There's really no need to go to South Africa or Peru or New Zealand when we have so much great wool in Canada. So I wanted to do the same thing for the Canadian wool industry. And I sourced 4 wools across Canada that either raise sheep or process Canadian fiber. And they range from rustic to next to skin softness. And this is where the micron count comes in too. So they run from worsted to Aran weight. I would say the last one I'm going to tell you about is probably closer to an Aran weight, but they're marketed as worsted. They all contain lanolin, which is great for your outerwear. It makes outerwear rain resistant. It reduces fiber shedding. It extends the life of your garment, and it's also a great moisturizer for your skin. And one of the things I think we instinctively do when we pick up a skein is we squish it. We want to feel it that way. And what happens when you do that to something rustic is that you hear it crunch and you go, oh, it's too rough. Oh, I don't like that. It's going to be itchy. What is recommended is that you take 2 fingers down the length of a strand and feel it that way. So just instead of squish, take 2 fingers and just feel the yarn. You'll feel the lanolin in it. You'll feel the fibers, and that gives you a more accurate representation of what the yarn is or the wool is going to feel like after it's been knit, because this is not how we knit with something. Another thing that we should do is swatch and then wash and wear the swatch. Wear it next to your skin, sleep with it, and then wash it again and wear it again, and keep doing that, because every time you wash the wool, it will soften and change. So that will also give you an idea of what the garment that you make with that wool is going to be like over the life of the garment. Okay, so micron, we mentioned micron. So we said that BFL was 24 to 28 microns. We're going to keep that in the back of our head here. So micron is a unit of measurement used for the diameter or fineness of a fiber. A lot of people have to use a microscope. I work with a classer at the alpaca mill who can look at fiber and know exactly how many microns it is. It's just a matter of experience. A micron is 1/1000th of a millimeter, if you can imagine how tiny that is. The lower the micron count, the finer the fiber. And the higher the micron count, the coarser the fiber. Commercial manufacturers aim for an average of 19 to 21.5. So to give you some context of what that means, cashmere is 15 to 19 microns. So you know how soft cashmere is. Superfine merino, they aim for about 17. Fine wool, 17 to 22. So we're talking fine wool, like a step up on the merino scale. Alpaca from fine to mid-grade is 19 to 28 microns. Coarse wool is 27 to 33. So the 24 to 28 microns for the BFL would fall in the mid-grade alpaca range. And then just for comparison, human hair is 40 to 100 microns, depending on the coarseness of your hair. So the 4 bases that I sourced for Knit Canadian are from Amherst Island in Ontario, River John, Nova Scotia, Mountain View, Alberta, and Brunswick is from New Brunswick. So let's get into those bases. So Amherst Island is 100% wool from Canadian Suffolk, Border Cheviot, and Rideau Arcot sheep. It's 28 to 33 microns. So it is pretty rustic. It's grown on Topsy Farms in Stella, Ontario. And McCausland's Woolen Mills and PEI has spun the yarn. So even though it's rustic, it would make amazing outerwear. River John is from 100% wool from Dorset sheep. Jillian and John raised their sheep at Lismore Sheep Farm in Nova Scotia. Dorset sheep produce a nice bright white fleece, and it's 27 to 33 microns. So it is more white, I would say, than Amherst, but it is around the same micron count. So it is a little bit more rustic as well. Mountain View is spun by Custom Woolen Mills, and they get their wool from the Western Canadian farmers and the Canadian co-op in Alberta and process it there. It's Canadian Merino and Rambouillet sheep, which you can imagine is pretty soft. It's 19 to 25 microns. So that's around like fine alpaca range. It's got a beautiful lanolin content. And a great twist. I can actually tell the difference between the 4 of which one is Mountain View because of the twist. It's got a very unique twist. The last one is Brunswick, and this one is the one I find, they call it worsted, but I find it does range up to an Aran weight. It's from a mixture of sheep, And that comes from Ontario, Carleton Place, Ontario, Canadian Cooperative Wool Growers. And it's spun by Briggs & Little. So it's 25 microns, which is the same as mid-grade alpaca. I have a feud going on with one of my friends that she thinks Mountain View is softer because of the lanolin content. I think Brunswick is softer because of the micron content. But, you know, it's a personal preference, and it's all beautiful when you work with it. So knit Canadian colorway. So the colorways I'm about to show you work across all of the knit Canadian skeins. So Diablo is that nice orange red with the highlights of darker red. And there is black in here, but what happens is it blends with the red and just turns into sort of more of an almost burgundy color. Fresh lilacs, again, with that different purple, but you can see that there's less distinction between the purples on the DK and the other bases. Even the BFL, there was very distinct purple areas. This is more of a nice watercolor kind of effect. Marinus, which is that unique, not quite blue, definitely not green color, which is used also to make sea glass, which is on the right-hand side there. And then spring growth is that mixture of greens and yellow. There's a swatch there on the right-hand side. It's been a very popular color. Driftwood is that nice warm natural color. And new for this year is fieldstone. So just like the Superwash Merino, it's the same colorway. And I used it in that sample that I showed you. And less defined color, but you still get that sense of shifting colors like fieldstone. Okay, so double row knitting. What is double row knitting? It was created by Nova Scotia's River John Needle Company and Fleece Artist as a way to avoid pooling for their hand-dyed yarns. Originally, they designed needles that looked like giant double-pointed needles with a stopper, a wooden stopper on one end. But what you can do is use circular needles and you knit or purl 2 rows in the same direction. It's a way to display the beautiful colors of hand-dyed yarns while avoiding color pooling. And it creates a horizontal rib and reversible fabric that gives you excellent drape and coziness. This is actually, this shawl was created with double row knitting. So I have some samples to show you, and I'm going to show you a demonstration as well. So it uses 2 colors or 2 different weights of yarn, or you can use the same skein split into 2 balls and just alternate if you're worried about color pooling. So there's 2 important terms with double row knitting. Slide is the first one. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to knit a row with color A. And then after I do that, I'm going to slide my stitches down my cable to the other end where I just came from and knit back in the same direction with color B. And then the other term is turn. So when I have both of my strands at one end, I am going to turn my work like we normally do. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen here. Okay, so I have a sample that I started. And what I'm going to do, I have 2 strands here. 2 strands. And I don't know if you can see that. I've done a couple rows already, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to knit with my color A, which happens to be driftwood. And the other color that I'm using today is something I was playing with. It's kind of an aqua color. It's a take on sea glass, but I was trying to do more of an ombre skein. It's a little bit more difficult to do with 100% wool because of the color spread. So I decided to turn it into a scarf instead. I can show you a sample of that. Okay, so I have knit one row of my driftwood. And now instead of turning, which is what we're all used to doing, we're going to slide back to the beginning and knit with color B, this sea glass sort of aqua color. So I'm going to knit back. So something to note, I have 4 patterns available on my website for double row knitting with instructions. But I will tell you right now that one thing that needs to happen is you need to use a much larger needle than you're used to. And I'll show you why. This is a 7mm needle, as opposed to make a 5.5 or 6 that I would have used. Okay, so now I have my yarn, both my ends of my working yarn at one end, and now I can turn. So what this does is it creates a horizontal rib. You can see 2 rows there of garter and 2 rows of stockinette. And in the middle of the garter rows is that aqua color, and it's being framed by the driftwood. So the reason that you need to use a larger needle, and what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to take color A and just cross it over color B and lock it in there for color, carrying the color up the side. So what it does when you use a larger needle is it opens things up, because this creates a horizontal rib, like I said. What does ribbing want to do? It wants to close in on itself. So this helps open things up. Double row knitting definitely benefits from being blocked to open up the spaces in between those garter rows. And here I am at the end of my row. And now I have 1 working yarn here and 1 working yarn here. I'm going to slide back over to the beginning where I left off. And I'm going to knit with color B. And that's really all there is to it. The shawls that I've created use a series of increases and decreases. And typically you want to do all the work with one of the yarns, and like I call it my high maintenance color, where you're doing your increases or decreases, and with the other color you're just knitting across, unless you want more extreme shaping. Like the shawl I have on right now is a asymmetric shawl, and I think I have decreases on both rows. So what's nice about this too is it's reversible. So there's the one side with the 2 garter rows, 2 stockinette. There's the other side, 2 garter rows, 2 stockinette. It's really helpful because of that to use a stitch marker so that you know what your right side is. Sometimes there's instructions that are only on the right side or only on the wrong side. So that definitely helps. And another thing that you can do, it doesn't have to be just knit. So what I'm going to show you now is what happens when you do a stockinette. So like traditional stockinette on the quote unquote right side, we're going to knit, except, oh, I picked up the wrong color there. That's okay. What we're going to do on the wrong side is purl. But we have 2 rows on the right side. So now I'm switching the order of my colors. So now my color B is going to be driftwood, just because I wasn't paying attention, talking to you guys. You can also change what the dominant color is by changing which color you start with. So in this sample, I cast on with the driftwood. I slid my stitches over to the other side, and I joined with the aqua color. If I had turned instead of slid, I would have ended up with a different accent in the middle of those garter rows. Okay, so I've got 2 here at the ends, but what I'm going to do now, instead of knitting across, is I am going to purl. And what happens is you end up obviously with a stockinette fabric. but you get single rows of color. So you'll get one row of stockinette driftwood and one row of stockinette aqua. And typically when you alternate colors, if you're going across in rows, you have to do 2 rows, because you're going to go there and then go back and pick up your other color. And then you're carrying your yarn up 2 rows as opposed to just this one. So it has more uses than just creating a horizontal rib, because actually when you do the stockinette, sliding to the other end, when you do the stockinette, you don't get that horizontal rib, because you're not just knitting, you're knitting and purling. So this was actually introduced to me by a friend of mine who lives in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, Gloria Grandi. And it was introduced to her through Jillian, the woman who runs Lismore Sheep Farm. She also has a yarn store. And out there they call it swing style knitting. We changed the name because it can get a bit confusing. There is something called swing knitting, which is short rows, some gorgeous patterns out there, but it's not the same thing. It's completely different. So we decided to call it double row knitting because you're, after all, knitting double rows. So let's see here. You can see. So there's the stockinette section. It's all stockinette, and you see 1 row of each color. So Gloria actually has a video on YouTube if you want to check out, if you're looking to just make like a square or a dishcloth, or, you know, just try it and practice it. You could make a scarf like this. I actually am using this for a scarf, and I don't know if you can see this. Like I said, the aqua color is in between the driftwood. So the driftwood's on the top and the bottom, and the aqua color is in the middle. For this scarf, I actually did it the other way. I've got the driftwood in the middle and the aqua on either side. So that's when I said it depends how you start the colors, that affects how it looks. I also have samples here. So this is the scarf, a shawl that I made. And this one, it was a mini skein kit that I created. This is the dusk triangle shawl that I mentioned. So what I did was I took an ombre skein from at the light part, light to start, and then I started the other skein at the dark. So I was working in reverse order for this shawl. And this is my all-time favorite back here. This is the Northern Lights rectangle shawl. It's a big one. It goes from purple to coral reef down here, like a blue. And it has that horizontal ribbing that you can see. This has been blocked, so you can see how nice and drapey and open it is, as opposed to it wanting to come together like a ribbing on a cuff or a hem, a sweater hem. And this pattern is available on my website, as well as this pattern here and the dusk triangle shawl. This one is an asymmetric triangle, and it's nice for draping because it's got these long tails. So it's got this nice long tail here, and it's a nice asymmetric triangle as well. This one, I had taken 2 mini skeins and alternated them. And then when I got to the next section, I changed the order. So if this is color A and color B, and I've run out of color A, I did color C and color B. So I changed the order, and that changed what skein was like the dominant color. And I just continued to do that throughout. This is called Fiona's Sunrise. And then, oh, the dusk colorway that I mentioned, this is the kindness shawl that I made for a friend of mine who was retiring. And so you can see the different blues there, nice lace at the bottom. It hasn't been blocked yet, but it's all done in one skein with no joins. So it's an ombre skein with about a 6-inch crossover between colors. So you don't get a ton of transition the way you would with some true ombre skeins, but that's the dusk there. So I also have a scarf pattern. That's the scarf. It's a nice lacy scarf that my friend Gloria created. So that is double row knitting. I'm just going to go back to sharing my screen here. So, where can you find Gravity Fiber yarn? Well, I'm at my local yarn store, which is String Theory Yarn Shop in Fergus, Ontario. The Knitting Basket in Rosemont, Ontario. Lane and Simple is an online only boutique coming in 2022. And they're going to have colorways that I don't carry on my website. So that's another option to check out. And as well as gravityfiber.com. I'm going to talk about the website in a second, but I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Gravity Fiber. The website I have sorted by weight. So if you're looking for a sock or fingering, all you have to do is look up at the top here, fingering and sock, Serendipity DK, and then Knit Canadian. I also have down underneath here the bases listed, so it will take you straight to the page that you're looking for. And of course, I've got the double row right up top there. I also have a sales section. It's got some one-of-a-kind skeins in there. You can also find me at the Hamilton Fiber Market this year, an in-person event. I'm so excited. Sunday, March 20th is that show. And then Kawartha Yarn and Fiber Festival, first time for me, June 11th in Funland Falls Community Center. So we're super excited about that one too. They didn't run last year or the year before that. So they're really excited. And I know that they release blocks of tickets for certain times and that they sell out pretty quickly. So definitely don't wait until you get to the door if you are going. And that's me. I just wanted to point out that if you use code FLA10, you can save 10% on any purchase on my website. And that shawl that's featured there, it was made by Lynn, who's a big fan of mine. That's the Ball for Lustrous fingering in the spring growth. And I think she did a fantastic job. That's the Storm shawl. And then at the bottom are some other samples of my colors that have been knit up. The one in the bottom right is actually Marinus, and that's turning into a Gansey sweater. Very jealous. I don't know if I have it in me to make a Gansey. But I also wanted to just say that I welcome custom dyeing. So if there's something that you see in a base that's not offered in another base, I'm more than willing to fill an order like that. If you want me to color match something, I'm pretty decent at that too. I've got a good eye for color. And yeah, are there any questions? Let's stop sharing here. Oh, sorry, I'm getting you back here. There we go. Oh, okay, yes. So it's funny because the woman who made my who made the Storm shawl out of spring growth was the one who introduced me to the Woolwork podcast. And because she was really looking for colorways or bases that were not superwash merino, because that's walls that she was finding. So she was one of my first customers who tried out the Ball for Lustrous fingering, and that one came from Fleece Artist, And I believe it is British wool, the BFL. I would have a hard time finding blue-faced Leicester here. I know that there are farms. And what I do find a lot of the time, and correct me if I'm wrong, in my research, I have found that a lot of farms are farming for milk or meat, and they don't really pay much attention to the fiber. I know it's a lot of work to shear the sheep and get it processed and then have to deal with all these skeins. But I really appreciate those that get that done. So anyway, any other questions, anybody? If you need to reach me at all, my email address, I'm going to put in the chat here. It's gravityfiber@gmail.com. And drop me a line anytime. I love to see finished projects. Yep, that's about it. Thank you. Thank you for paying attention to my my ramblings and going down the rabbit hole with me. Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate. Thank you, Rebecca and Linda. I really appreciate all the love that you're giving me right now. Thank you. You're making me blush. Thank you so much. Oh, Eureka, should I give a treasure hunt word? Oh, okay. Let's do luster. Oh, thanks, Tiffany. I appreciate that. She's glad this is being recorded because lots of great info. Yeah, I tried not to overwhelm you with too much information, but I think it's important to know how many microns are in your fiber, and that way you can really make an informed decision. So, oh, my favorite resource document. Oh, wool.ca has a lot of information. They're actually the cooperative group in Carlton Place. So they have some great information about the different breeds. Yeah, really. And that's all I can think of off the top of my head, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it helps that I worked at the alpaca farm. Or not farm, sorry, alpaca mill. I've picked up a lot of information, especially about the grades of fiber. I mean, I was always aware of alpaca, but I never really understood what went into the processing and how they were different as an animal compared to wool. So yes, and maybe in the future, since I work there, I can do up some dyeing for alpaca too. Is anybody interested in using alpaca? Good. Okay, Rebecca says yes. Good. Alpaca does take the dye differently. I find you have to use a higher percentage of dye to get more saturated color, and it does take the dye more slowly for sure, and is prone to felting. Not as bad as wool, but it will felt eventually. More about the process in alpaca. Okay, well, since we have time. So they buy fiber actually from Australia in giant, like 300-pound bales. And when they wash it, it goes, first it gets tumbled in a giant thing that looks like, the thing they use for giant contests when they're spinning the thing that has your names in it. It kind of looks like that. So they tumble that for about 40 minutes. The dirt falls out of it as much as possible. Then it goes into mesh laundry bags that contain 5 pounds of fiber, get washed in super hot water with a scouring soap 2 times with 3 rinses, and spun in a washing machine, just spun in between. Then it gets laid out on a table and we pull it apart. We take handfuls of fiber and we take out the vegetation and we open up the fiber for the machines in the mill to take care of, you know, opening it up even further. Once it hits the mill, it goes into a drying closet. So it dries overnight, and then it goes into the mill where it gets picked by the picker. It gets put through the carder twice. The carder aligns the fibers, so in one straight line, and turns it into roving, which then goes through the pin drafter. Once it's a certain weight through the pin drafter, it gets sent to the spinner, and that's where it gets really turned into yarn. And so they make socks. Some of the socks are single ply, some of them are double. So when it's turned into yarn, it's either sent to the plier to be plied and then cone wound, or it goes straight into cone winding. And then they have sock knitting machines from the 1970s that make the socks for them. They make them once a week, and they can make about 3 to 350 pair in a day. And then the socks get washed and quality from there. But they also make yarn, headbands, mitts. There's so many things you can do with alpaca. They have some of the fibers sent to a company in Toronto to be made into insoles. Yeah, I've learned a lot from the processing because I had no idea that so much went into it. And, you know, you look at the price of alpaca and you think, whoa, you know, you don't really understand why it's more. It's more because the animals cost more. They only get sheared once a year as opposed to sheep, which can be sheared twice. And there's a little similar processing, but a little bit more processing with the alpaca. So it definitely is worth it. It's 6 times more durable than wool and 6 times warmer, and not as prone to felting. Wool is prone to felting because of those scales. Alpaca as a fiber has microfibers that come off the strand. And so that helps keep it traps air. And so it insulates, but it breathes. It's a pretty remarkable fiber because you don't really overheat with it. It sort of moderates your temperature a little bit better. So I find that there's pros and cons with, you know, wool and alpaca. Wool, people complain it's itchy, but it has great structure, and it has an amazing elasticity, whereas alpaca lacks fiber memory, which is why you'll find a lot of it combined with nylon to help give it that little bit more flexibility. We like to joke that you start with a sweater and end with a dress, because it will just continue to stretch and stretch and stretch like cotton or silk or bamboo, and it never comes back into shape again. So I've made a hat with it before, and when I tried it, it was a flat hat, thankfully. When I tried it on, I just made it sure that it was stretched all the way, and that I knew it wouldn't stretch anymore after that. So it is great for certain things, like things next to your skin, cowls, fingerless mitts, but for some things it's not so great. So I'm sorry, I'm seeing a question here from Irene. I'm not sure what you meant by the dyes without giving away your trade secrets. So it's I don't mind, there's no trade secrets. It's a brand called Greener Shades, and they actually have 8 colors. I don't use their black because it breaks into brown sometimes, and I didn't love that. And the one color that they have that does have metal in it is the coral reef color. It's like a turquoise color. It's got copper. So it uses copper to get that nice turquoise color. And I do use that when I need to, but I try to stick with those 6 core acid or heavy metal free acid dyes. So it's a brand called Greener Shades, and it's not as cheap. It's a little bit more expensive than like a jacquard or a dharma, but I think it's worth it because it's a less risk for me to be using it, and it's a little bit better environmentally for things not to be going down the drain that contain heavy metals. So I hope that answers your question. So you got a lesson on natural wool, superwash wool, micron count, and alpaca today. You have been informed. You can't say you didn't learn something today. All right. Thank you. Thanks so much. I really appreciate you being here and taking the time to listen to me. Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm glad that you guys learned something. It's important to me.